Your position is being eliminated. Accept this entry-level role or leave. Those words, spoken in a dry, sterile tone, hung in the cold conference room. The human resources representative, Brenda Cole, stared at the wall behind me, refusing to meet my eyes. Sitting beside her was George Lawson, the general counsel, who held a manila folder with the indifference of an executioner holding a warrant. I sat there in silence, my mind trying to reconcile 24 years of dedicated service with the clinical cruelty of a 15-minute meeting. My throat felt tight and my hands trembled slightly as I thought of the mortgage payment due in just 5 days. "Can I have until tomorrow to consider this?" I asked, my voice barely louder than a whisper. George Lawson cleared his throat and nodded once, a brief gesture of mock generosity before they dismissed me like yesterday's office trash. For over 2 decades, I had poured my entire life into growing the firm's client portfolio. While other managers went home to their families, attended weekend getaways, and enjoyed holiday recitals, I stayed behind at Vanguard Advisory Partners. I was 55 years old, single, and had spent half my lifetime cultivating relationships with our high-value prospects. My dedication had transformed what was once a struggling regional firm into a major industry leader. I had built the foundations of our client trust brick by brick. Every winter, during the executive dinners, the senior leadership celebrated record-breaking profits that I had directly secured through my sweat and sleepless nights. Yet here I was, being told my role was being dissolved because of a corporate restructuring. As I walked back to my desk, a former colleague sent me a private message on a personal channel. He told me that my position wasn't actually eliminated. The truth was that the chief executive officer, Charles Croft, was bringing in his nephew, Jared Croft, to take over my division starting next Monday. Jared was young, green, and completely inexperienced, but he carried the family name. Hearing this confirmed my worst fears. It wasn't about restructuring or budget cuts. It was about nepotism. But before I tell you how I turned this betrayal into the most satisfying transition of my career, I want to clarify something. This isn't just another office drama. It is a lesson in recognizing your own worth when the people paying your salary choose to ignore it. If you have ever been undervalued or cast aside despite your excellence, this story is for you. Keep listening until the end, because the path I took didn't just save my career, it completely shifted the balance of power in ways they never anticipated. Professionally, I had always been known as the fixer. I was the one who could walk into a room of angry clients and walk out with signed contract renewals. I didn't rely on cheap tricks or slick presentations. I built success on genuine care for the client's business. Outside of the office, I lived a very quiet, simple life. My small home near the lake, with its wild garden and piles of old history books, was my sanctuary. I had never married, partly because my career demanded so much of my time, and partly because I had never found a partner who understood my devotion to the work. But I was never lonely. My rescue dog, Buster, was always waiting for me at the front door, greeting me with wild enthusiasm, whether I came home early or past midnight. He was my anchor in a world that was increasingly dominated by corporate metrics and artificial deadlines. Looking back, I should have noticed the warning signs earlier. Over the past few months, small things had begun to change. Meeting invitations for key strategy sessions would mysteriously fail to reach my inbox. Crucial client updates were relocated to weekend golf outings that I was never invited to attend. When I asked about these exclusions, my manager would laugh it off as a simple mistake or a scheduling conflict. But denial is a powerful shield when you have invested 24 years of your life in one place. I chose to believe their excuses rather than accept the painful reality that I was being systematically pushed out of the loop. The morning of my demotion had started like any other. I arrived at the office at 6:30 in the morning, a full 2 hours before the rest of the staff, to review the quarterly numbers. When I saw the calendar invite for a 9:30 meeting with Brenda Cole from Human Resources, I assumed it was a discussion about our health insurance policies. When I walked in and saw George Lawson sitting next to her with that thick folder, the atmosphere in the room immediately shifted. They didn't offer to shake my hand. Brenda simply opened her mouth and delivered the blow. The new entry-level administrative role they were offering came with a 45% salary reduction. My mind immediately raced with the financial math. Between my mortgage, my elderly mother, Clara's assisted living facility expenses in Madison, and the rising cost of utilities, surviving on that salary would be completely impossible. This decision is final, Brenda had added, her voice devoid of any human warmth. The general counsel chimed in, reminding me that they were offering me continued employment when they could have simply terminated me with nothing. I wanted to tell them what 24 years of loyalty was worth, but I kept my composure. I asked for 48 hours to consider their offer. As I walked back to my desk, the silence in the hallways was deafening. People avoided my gaze. My system access had already been restricted, and I could no longer view the client databases. I quietly packed a few personal items, a small desk plant, and a handwritten letter from my first major client, and walked out to my car. Sitting in my car, the reality of the betrayal hit me, but instead of panic, a strange feeling of determination took over. I reached for my phone and dialed a number I had memorized years ago. It was Harvey Sinclair, the chief financial officer of Cascade Wealth Management. Cascade was our largest account, worth $20 million. And I had personally managed and grown that relationship from a small regional account into the firm's most profitable asset. Harvey answered almost immediately, asking if everything was prepared for the upcoming quarterly review. I took a deep breath. Harvey, I am calling to let you know that my position has been eliminated, effective immediately. There was a long pause on the other end of the line, the silence heavy with surprise. He asked where I was, and when I told him I was in the company parking lot, he told me to stay there. He was across town but would meet me in 30 minutes. 30 minutes later, Harvey Sinclair's sedan pulled into the parking space next to mine. He gestured toward a quiet coffee shop across the street, and we walked over in silence. Once we were seated in a corner booth, Harvey looked at me with deep concern. "What on earth is happening over there, Daniel?" he asked. I explained the situation, detailing the sudden meeting, the administrative roll-offer, and the 45% salary reduction. As I spoke, Harvey's expression hardened from concern into frustration. "That explains it," he said, shaking his head. "Charles Croft has been trying to bypass you for weeks. He has been setting up informal lunches with our executive team, trying to introduce his nephew, Jared Croft, as our new primary contact." Harvey leaned forward, his voice low. "We met with Jared last week, and it was an absolute disaster. The young man spent the entire lunch talking about his golf handicap and his ideas for modernizing our accounts. When I mentioned the custom compliance reporting system you built for us, he suggested we migrate to their standard platform. He called your design a legacy system that was slowing down operations." I felt a quick surge of vindication. The custom compliance framework had taken me nearly a year to develop, specifically tailored to handle Cascade's multi-jurisdictional reporting rules. It was the only thing preventing massive regulatory penalties for their transaction database. "Here is the reality, Daniel," Harvey continued, looking me in the eye. "Our contract with your firm is up for renewal in exactly 80 days. We have already been approached by 3 of your competitors, and the only reason we haven't answered their calls is because of you. Cascade is expanding. We are acquiring 2 regional banks next quarter, and our compliance needs are going to double. The board is currently deciding whether to expand our agreement with your firm or bring the entire operations system in-house." He paused, letting the words sink in. "I would prefer a third option. I want to hire you as our independent advisor to manage the expansion." I sat there, processing his words. "You want me to leave and take your business with me?" Harvey shook his head. "I want to hire the professional who made us successful. What we do with the firm's contract is a separate decision that our board will make. But I want you running our compliance transition." I thought about the mortgage payment due in 5 days, about the 24 years of loyalty that had been rewarded with a humiliating demotion, and about the CEO's nephew stepping into the relationships I had spent my life building. "I need a little time to think about this," I said. Harvey nodded, reminding me that 80 days pass very quickly. That evening, I sat on my porch with my dog, Buster, watching the evening light fade over the lake. My phone buzzed with messages from colleagues. Some were genuinely shocked, while others were simply looking for gossip to share around the office. One text stood out from Abby. the receptionist who had started as an intern during my early years. "They have already cleared out your office, Daniel," she wrote. "Jared Croft's nameplate is already on the door. He spent the afternoon ordering new furniture from an expensive designer boutique downtown." Seeing that message made something click inside me. The firm had discarded my decades of service without a second thought. They were already rewriting my history. Why should I feel bound by an old concept of loyalty to a company that showed none to me? We sat in that warm booth for nearly 2 hours, dissecting the political shifts within our respective organizations. Harvey explained that the internal board at Cascade was becoming increasingly impatient with the rising service fees and the lack of personalized attention. I listened quietly, realizing that the relationship I had protected was the only thread keeping the contract alive. The realization that my efforts were the sole anchor for a $20 million portfolio brought a strange sense of calm. I knew my worth, even if the executives in the corner offices did not. When we finally stood up to leave, the cool afternoon breeze felt like a clean slate, and I knew my life was about to change. By the next morning, I had formulated a strategy. I arrived at the office early and sent a brief email to Brenda Cole, accepting the entry-level administrative position. The response was immediate confusion. The management team had clearly expected me to resign in anger, saving them the trouble of managing a transition. When I walked into the administrative pool to start my new duties, the tension was thick. Younger staff members whispered behind their cubicles, wondering why a former senior director was sitting at a basic workstation. My new supervisor, a woman 15 years younger than me, was visibly uncomfortable as she explained my new tasks, constantly repeating that I probably already knew how to do this. My plan was simple. I needed information and visibility. By staying inside the building, I had access to the basic communication channels and could observe how Jared Croft handled the Cascade account. I called Harvey Sinclair that afternoon from a private line. "I am accepting your consulting offer," I told him, "but I am also staying at the firm in an administrative capacity for the time being." Harvey was surprised but quickly understood the strategy. "I want to ensure Cascade receives a proper transition," I added. "I will begin my consulting services for you immediately after hours. We will need to structure the agreement carefully to avoid any initial conflicts of interest." Harvey agreed, his tone filled with a new level of respect. He knew that the game was just beginning. For the next 4 weeks, I lived a double life. During the day, I performed simple administrative tasks with absolute precision. I sorted mail, filed expense reports, and organized files, maintaining a polite and helpful attitude that left my former colleagues completely bewildered. They had expected resentment, but I gave them nothing but quiet efficiency. After hours, I met with Harvey Sinclair and the Cascade team, building a detailed map of their compliance architecture. I documented every custom script, every reporting filter, and every database query I had implemented over the years. This critical knowledge existed only in my head, as the firm had never grasped the custom designs. Meanwhile, I watched Jared Croft struggle to manage the Cascade account. He was exactly as Harvey had described him: confident, loud, and entirely out of his depth. He made decisions based on slide decks rather than operational reality. He rescheduled meetings to accommodate his social calendar and dismissed the concerns of the technical team who had worked with me for years. Most dangerously, he began dismantling the custom reporting system I had built, insisting that migrating to the firm's standard enterprise platform would streamline their workflow. He failed to understand that the custom system wasn't a matter of convenience. It was a regulatory shield. Cascade's unique financial products meant they were subject to strict multi-jurisdictional laws that the standard platform could not track. During the 3rd week of the transition, several database administrators cornered me in the break room. They whispered about the massive errors they were seeing, terrified that the system would crash before the quarterly audit. I had to maintain my mask of administrative ignorance, telling them I was only in charge of sorting files while quietly noting their reports to share with Harvey after hours. When the database engineers tried to present a formal warning log showing transaction mismatches, Jared Croft dismissed their concerns with an arrogant wave of his hand. He told them that the errors were simply browser cache issues and instructed them to update their software, showing a staggering ignorance of enterprise database systems. The engineering team left the meeting in absolute frustration, realizing they were being directed by an amateur. The technical team tried to warn him, but Jared arrogantly brushed them aside, claiming they were simply resistant to change. When the initial testing phase of the migration began, it immediately caused massive data discrepancies in Cascade's compliance logs. Jared dismissed the errors as minor transition glitches, ignoring the warnings of impending regulatory deadlines. He was so focused on showing the board how quickly he could modernize the account that he was blind to the disaster he was creating. The tension within the office grew daily as the technical staff realized they were being forced to build a system destined for failure. Every afternoon, I would sit at my desk and watch the sunset cast long silhouettes across the open floor plan. I observed the way the managers hurried from meeting to meeting, clutching their tablets and talking about key performance indicators, completely oblivious to the operational storm brewing in the database logs. I felt like an observer in a house that was slowly sliding down a hill, watching the residents rearrange the furniture instead of fixing the foundation. The contrast between my quiet administrative tasks and the high-level compliance architecture I was building for Cascade after hours was stark. It was a rigorous test of my discipline, but I knew that every document I compiled was a brick in the fortress of my future independence. 4 weeks into my administrative role, the warning lights turned red. Cascade's internal compliance audits flagged dozens of missing regulatory filings, all stemming from the standard platform's inability to process their complex data. The threat of a federal compliance audit was no longer a distant possibility. It was an immediate crisis. Harvey Sinclair called an emergency meeting with the firm's leadership to address the failures. The meeting was scheduled for the following Monday morning at 9. Jared appeared unconcerned, bragging to the sales team that he would easily handle the client's anxiety with a fresh presentation. On Friday afternoon, my screen flashed with an unexpected calendar invite from the Chief Executive Officer's secretary. It was a meeting notice for the Monday morning discussion, and my name was listed alongside Jared's and the executive team. It seemed someone in compliance had finally remembered who had designed the original system and possessed the knowledge to fix the mess. I spent the weekend preparing, not to help them save the account, but to protect my own interests. I reviewed my consulting contract with Harvey and met with my lawyer to confirm my legal position. My lawyer pointed out that the non-compete clause in my original employment contract was highly vulnerable because of the firm's material breach of my contract terms. Monday morning arrived, and the atmosphere in the executive conference room was incredibly tense. I wore a simple professional suit and took a seat at the far end of the long mahogany table. When the CEO, Charles Croft, entered, his eyes narrowed as he noticed me, but he said nothing. A moment later, Harvey Sinclair walked in, accompanied by Cascade's General Counsel and Chief Operating Officer. The presence of 3 senior executives from our largest client made it clear that this was not a routine discussion. After brief introductions, Harvey opened the meeting with cold, professional anger, detailing the system failures and the missed regulatory deadlines that had put their expansion plans in jeopardy. Jared Croft immediately tried to minimize the issues, presenting a colorful slide deck and talking about the advantages of the new enterprise platform. Harvey Sinclair didn't even look at the slides. He gestured toward Daniel, sitting at the end of the table. "Mr. Croft, the systems we rely on were custom-built to handle our regulatory requirements," Harvey said. "Your new platform has failed to process over 40 separate compliance flags in the last month alone. We have lost critical institutional knowledge, and our systems are currently out of compliance. Is that correct, Daniel?" All eyes turned to me. I opened my notebook and spoke calmly, keeping my tone strictly professional and objective. The custom reporting system was designed to handle Cascade's unique regulatory needs, I explained. It checks transactions across 3 different jurisdictions in real time. The standard platform lacks the necessary database filters to perform these checks, which is why the data logs are showing errors. Dismantling the custom system without replicating those filters has created a severe compliance gap. The CEO's face darkened. If you knew this, Daniel, why didn't you raise these concerns earlier? He asked. I looked him in the eye. My current role in administration does not include client system oversight, I replied. I was not consulted on the migration plan. An uncomfortable silence fell over the room. Harvey Sinclair used the silence to slide 3 folders across the table. We have prepared an assessment of our current service agreement, Harvey stated. Given the recent compliance failures, we are restructuring our relationship. We are unbundling our services. We will maintain a basic partnership with your firm, but we are removing compliance management and system maintenance from the contract. This change will reduce the contract value by exactly 50%. The general counsel from Cascade leaned back, his eyes fixed on the ceiling as the implications of the system failures became clear to everyone. The room seemed to grow smaller as the silence stretched, the weight of the lost revenue pressing down on the executives. I watched Charles Croft's hands tighten around the edge of his folder, his knuckles turning white as he realized the magnitude of the disaster. The corporate posturing was gone, replaced by a desperate search for a solution that didn't exist on any slide deck. I sat at the end of the table, a quiet witness to the inevitable outcome of prioritizing family connections over professional competence and regulatory compliance. Jared Croft grabbed the folder, his hands shaking as he read the numbers. But this represents a loss of $10 million, he stammered, looking at his uncle. The CEO turned to me, desperation showing behind his eyes. Daniel, you have the expertise to resolve this. If we reinstate you to your previous position immediately, can you fix these system errors and restore Cascade's confidence? It was the moment I had anticipated. They wanted to use my years of knowledge to repair the damage caused by their own nepotism, all while keeping the revenue. I maintained my composure and shook my head. I appreciate the offer, I said, but I believe the company has already determined where my skills are best utilized. I am comfortable in my administrative role. The confusion on their faces was palpable. They had expected me to jump at the chance to reclaim my old title and salary, but my refusal left them completely powerless. Harvey Sinclair stood up, signaling the end of the meeting. We expect the transition to the revised contract terms to begin immediately, he said. Our board will sign the final documents on Friday. After the client left, the executive wing fell into a state of panic. The loss of 50% of their largest account's revenue would devastate their quarterly projections and damage their reputation in the industry. The CEO's secretary called me into his private office the next morning. Charles Croft was sitting behind his desk, looking older and tired. Daniel, we have worked together for a long time, he began, trying to sound warm. I admit we moved too quickly with the account transition. Jared is young and made mistakes, but we need to resolve this. I am offering you a full reinstatement, a senior director title, and a significant salary increase. We need you to convince Cascade to keep the full contract. I looked at him, remembering the cold conference room where Brenda Cole had told me my 24 years of service meant nothing. I remembered my computer access being cut off before I had even packed my desk. I appreciate the offer, I said, but my answer remains the same. I will not intervene with Cascade. Their decision is based on a realistic assessment of their needs. The CEO's expression changed, his warmth disappearing. You are playing a dangerous game, Daniel. We know you have been consulting with them. If you try to work for them directly, we will sue you for violating your non-compete clause. We will tie you up in court for years. This was the moment I had prepared for, my legal destroyer button. I looked at the CEO and the general counsel, who had just entered the room. My lawyer has already reviewed the non-compete clause, I said, my voice steady and firm. Under established U.S. employment law, when an employer constructively discharges an employee or materially breaches the terms of the employment contract, any restrictive covenants become void from the beginning. By unilaterally demoting me, cutting my salary by 45%, and restricting my duties after 24 years of service, the firm committed a material breach. Therefore, the non-compete is legally void ab initio. You have no grounds to enforce it. George Lawson, the general counsel, went pale. He looked at the CEO and slowly closed his folder, nodding slightly to confirm that my legal assessment was correct. But I wasn't finished. Beyond that, I continued, the decision to replace an experienced director with an unqualified family member, directly resulting in the loss of a $10 million contract, constitutes a clear breach of fiduciary duty to the company's shareholders. If the board of directors discovers that you intentionally sacrificed our largest client relationship to favor your nephew, you will face personal liability. Your corporate indemnity will not protect you from shareholder lawsuits for wasting corporate assets. The silence in the room was absolute. Charles Croft stared at me, his mouth slightly open, unable to find a response. He realized that I held all the cards. I placed a printed sheet of paper on his desk. "This is my formal resignation, effective immediately," I said. "I will cooperate with the transition of the remaining services, but my employment here is finished." I stood up, walked out of his office, and left the executive floor. I packed my remaining personal items from my administrative desk, said goodbye to Abby at the reception desk, and walked out of the building into the bright morning air. On Friday morning, Cascade Wealth Management officially signed the revised contract, reducing their business with the firm by 50%. The following Monday, I began my independent consulting role with Cascade, working directly with Harvey Sinclair's team to rebuild their compliance system. This time, we created full documentation and trained 6 technical specialists to ensure the knowledge was shared. The work was challenging but highly satisfying. For the first time in my career, I worked reasonable hours. I had my evenings free to spend with Buster, to work in my garden, and to enjoy the life I had ignored for 24 years. The fallout from my former employer was severe. 3 months later, the company reported a 30% decline in revenue, and their stock price dropped by 40 points. Jared Croft resigned in disgrace, pretending he was leaving to attend graduate school. Within 6 months, the firm was acquired by a competitor at a 60% devaluation from its previous market value. The industry news specifically cited the loss of key client relationships and compliance failures as the primary reasons for the sale. Charles Croft was forced to step down as CEO, his career ending in humiliation. Devon Aldridge had been the former client lead, but Harvey Sinclair was the man who recognized my value. 4 months into my consulting role, Harvey offered me a permanent position as the Director of Regulatory Systems, with a salary double what I had made at my old firm, along with a healthy bonus structure and real work-life balance. I accepted the offer, knowing that I had earned it through my skills and integrity. Sitting on my porch in the evening, watching Buster run across the grass, I realized that true revenge wasn't about destroying my former employers. It was about recognizing my own value when they failed to, and building a better life on my own terms.